Good afternoon. My name is Paul. I have a United States passport, but I've been living in Indonesia for more than half my life. I was born there, and then at the age of 30, I moved back, and I've been there for the last 14 years. And I'm involved in a movement of Christian education, and I'm here to represent those of us who work in Christian schools around the world. And I was asked to facilitate the education track, and we had 5 speakers, and it was so inspiring. 2 of our speakers were from the Middle East. One was from Egypt, one was from Pakistan, and it was incredible to hear what God is doing through them and through their schools, through their curriculum, to reach so many kids. It opened my eyes. When we think about or when we read the world through CNN, we get a totally different picture, don't we, of what God is actually doing. And for me, this is the great value of being at this conference. I knew that by coming, God would speak to me. I knew that by coming, I would learn something. But perhaps most of all, the greatest value is that for those of us that are passionate about serving children, about discipling children, we feel alone, don't we? We're not around a lot of other people who think like us. And we've received this calling from God. It's burning in our hearts. But yet we don't share that with a lot of other people. That other people just look at us like we're crazy. But yet here we are, and look around and see. And it's so inspiring to me. So it's a little bit of heavenly humor that I would be called into Christian education, because I was a terrible student. I never liked school. I always thought school was boring. I was always the boy looking out the window. I was always the boy who couldn't wait to get outside and play sports. I was always the one causing trouble all the way up through high school. Never took school very seriously. So it's crazy that God has called me into this field. But when I lived in Los Angeles and I was in my mid-20s, God gave me the opportunity to open a charter school in the inner city, in the city of Compton, working with gang members and just helping kids that were transitioning back out of jail to try to get back into normal schools. And they would come and spend some time with me before they went there. And then in 1999, God called my wife Cindy and me to go and serve at an international school in Indonesia. So we went there, and I just started working there, and it was an incredible job. It was a very plush school, very luxurious. We had a chance to build a new campus. We had a nice big computer lab and all kinds of facilities and fantastic teachers. And yet, around the school were the people of Indonesia, were the people in the kampung, the desa, the villages. And I had a chance to go out. There was one of the board members in my school that would take me out, and he would say, "Paul, come with me this weekend. We're going to go visit some Christian schools." Okay, let's go. And I witnessed how there were these amazing Indonesian teachers teaching for very tiny salaries, with loving hearts, very few facilities, and they were working in these villages in small Christian schools, and they were having such a powerful impact. And at the same time, I kept on meeting what we call MBB, Muslim background believers. And every time I meet one of them, I want to hear their story. And it just so happened that within about a 6-week period, every single one that I met, and they shared their story, they shared the same one. And that is that as they were growing up in the village, the only school that was close to their house was a Christian school. Now, mind you, this is Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim country. And yet there are 5,000 Christian schools, of which 95% of them are these small 1 or 2 room schools in villages, in rural areas. And I kept on meeting people who came into Christian schools in kindergarten, in elementary school, and they met Christ through loving and caring Christian teachers. And then in time, they became adults, believers who proclaimed their faith. And through this, God was speaking to me. And after one of these trips, I came back home. It was late on a Sunday night. I woke up in the middle of the night, about 2 o'clock in the morning. And the Spirit of God spoke to me so powerfully. And God just placed in my heart a vision, a burden to resign from the school where I was working, to go out into the community and to open an Indonesian school that would become a model school, a place where we could train Indonesian teachers to raise up the leaders for the future of our nation. Now, I want to just share with you a little bit here. There we go. There's the country of Indonesia. 13,000 islands, they say. 4th largest country in the world. And if you look far to the right, you see the island of Papua. It looks like a big dinosaur. Now, this island is one of the most remote, perhaps dangerous, wild places on the face of the earth. This is where my parents went in 1962. My mom and my dad got into a little canoe. They traveled 20 miles up this winding river into the jungle, and they settled amongst a tribe of treehouse-dwelling cannibals and headhunters. And my parents lived there for 16 years. My dad eventually wrote a book called Peace Child and several other books which chronicled the story of how the gospel came alive to the people in their own culture. And simultaneously, across the island of Papua, in the second half of the 20th century, tens of thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of people in the Stone Age woke up spiritually. They joined the church, and up to 80% of a population of around 2 million people on that island today would call themselves Christian. And as I look back on that, I realize this was one of the greatest movements of the gospel and of church planting, perhaps ever, in the 2,000-year history of the church. That in such a short period of time, so many people would be responsive. In fact, there were places, there were villages or valleys where so many thousands of people were wanting to get baptized that the missionaries just didn't know what to do. Well, at the age of 10, my family moved. We went back to North America. And then I sort of lost track of where I came from and lived the American life. And then it wasn't until I was 30 I came back. And then I had the chance to go once again to my childhood home, to Papua. Now, I would expect that if the gospel has come and if thousands of churches have been planted, and if 80% of the population is in church every single Sunday morning, I would expect that there would be a significant or visible transformation within society, and that there would be healthy families emerging, that there would be peaceful communities. And that's exactly what I was anticipating when I went back to my childhood island and to the tribes. But to my shock, what I actually saw was the opposite. Papua has become home to one of the highest HIV/AIDS rates on the entire planet. Papua is a place where the cities are so dangerous that girls simply should never go out at night. Papua is a place where families are broken and where kids roam the streets and are using drugs and joining gangs. And it is an island that is filled with these just horrible problems. And this was disillusioning to me. It actually created a crisis of faith in my life. It seemed impossible. How could the dream that I experienced as a child result in this? And I had to ask some very honest questions. What went wrong? The missionaries who evangelized the people of Papua are my heroes and continue to be. So many of them gave their lives. They became martyrs. Many of them died in plane crashes. They dedicated their lives. And on some of them, having been interviewed, I find some very interesting patterns. And that is that most of them will freely acknowledge today that discipleship was not even part of their vocabulary. They were a generation that lived with the understanding or with the belief that Jesus would come back in their own lifetime. And so with that belief, they lived naturally with a very short-term thinking. And the idea of discipling believers wasn't even a part of their job description. And I would propose that perhaps what we see today, and I don't mean to be so simplistic, I realize you could write volumes about this situation. But I'm talking to you personally. In my own journey, I was confronted by this, and it was jolting to me. And I began to have a personal just journey of saying, God, what do you want me to do? Now I have here 4 cornerstones, which have become the cornerstones to our response in our ministry. The first is what I would call the Jesus way. When I look back, you think of Jesus could have used any possible strategy to launch his kingdom and advance the church across the world. What did Jesus actually do? It is really quite simple. Jesus called a small group of young men. We use the word disciples, but really that word means students. He called them to himself, and he became their guru, their teacher, their rabbi. In the culture of that time in Palestine, a rabbi was someone who took under his arm, took under his wing, a group of approximately 12 young men between the ages of 16 and 18. And these young men would follow their rabbi and would imitate everything that he did. The way that the rabbi ate, they would eat. The way he combed his hair, they would comb their own hair. Everything that he said, the way that he said it, they would follow and model everything that their teacher did. And I find it interesting that upon Jesus' public ministry, he was immediately called rabbi. And he had a group of young men. Don't believe in the Michelangelo paintings that show the disciples of Jesus as long, gray-bearded, elderly men. Try reading the Gospels again with a fresh perspective, envisioning that Jesus was in youth ministry and that the disciples, on average, were about 16, 17, or 18 years old. And I guarantee you, it will come alive. And the conversations, the confrontations, John placing his head on Jesus' lap, a mother with her 2 teenage boys saying, which one of my boys can sit, can they sit on your right, on your left hand someday? Things like this, they're all over the place. In fact, when you have been involved in youth ministry as I have, and you read about Jesus and what he taught and how he engaged with his disciples, it's so obvious. That's really what Jesus did. The Jesus way is discipleship. It's deep. It's lasting. It's long. 3.5 years, he invested his life into these young men. Secondly, I would look at this. The second response or pillar of response is what I call dimensions. Now, if you just think of influence, let's look at influence as a commodity. And it seems fairly obvious to me that if you have a wide range of influence, in other words, if you're influencing thousands of people, then you must sacrifice the depth. That means the wider that you spread your seed, that means the shallower your influence. But yet, the more intense, or if you only influence one person and you profoundly influence that one person, your influence is very deep, but yet it's extremely narrow. And so when we look at influence, we have to consider the dimensions. And as counterintuitive as it was, Jesus chose an extremely narrow influence. We have a few examples, 3, maybe 4, where Jesus addressed large crowds, thousands of people, but yet day in and day out, morning and night together, he was investing his life into a small group of young men with the purpose of raising them up to be leaders for that next generation. The third one has been repeated so many times. It's the age of receptivity, so I won't take a lot of time on that. I'm going to jump to the fourth one here. This is the number 400. This number struck me years ago. What does this number represent? One teacher who really understands how to share Christ with kids. One teacher who understands how kids learn. One teacher who is an expert teacher, who has a heart for his or her students. And if that one teacher teaches just 20 students every year, and if that teacher teaches for 20 years, that means that in that teacher's lifetime, they will have a profound, deep influence on the hearts, the minds, and the souls of 400 people. And that's what helped me to realize that if I were to invest my life into Christian teachers, this would be an extremely strategic way to live my life. Here, I realize these are very small words, but if you look in the middle, it says graduates. In 2003, I started a school, and this school was launched with a 20-year plan in front of us. 10 years to develop a school. Not like your typical Christian schools that teach everything the same as the public schools, except for Bible class and chapel. But truly a school where teachers understand how to develop leaders, a school that is just thriving with the creativity of the Spirit of God, a school where character is being forged. And I knew that if I started trying to train teachers to do this without a model school first, it would just be words, and I would have very little impact. So I wanted to show the world that yes, there can be a school that genuinely can change the world. And so I dedicated myself for 10 years to develop a model school, and then beginning in year 11, that we would start training teachers in that school. And so now we are starting in year 3 of the second phase. Now, if you look here, I want to just sort of give you the eye or the vision of a Christian educator, okay? There is a trend or a habit that I've seen in Indonesia, and I don't know if it's the same in your country, but if there's a young man who, at a young age, is passionate for God and loves the Bible, what do all the adults immediately start telling that young man? You're going to be a pastor. All right. To me, this is not, no offense to pastors, but as I envision the church, I'm not really thinking so much about what happens on Sunday mornings. I love what happens on Sunday mornings. We're empowered, we worship, we hear the word of God being taught, but the whole point is to be sent out into the world, correct? So that in the market, in the places, in the schools, in the government, in our jobs, we're the light of the world, we're the salt of the earth. And so the vision of the Christian school is to raise up leaders, people who know God, who hear God's voice, who listen to the Spirit of God, but yet they are working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Every day they're in the marketplace. These are leaders in what we call the domains. If you look here, you have the domains of society. At the top is education. Our vision is to send out leaders who take over the educational system of Indonesia. Education is like a tribe. Within the world of education, there are voices of influence. We want for Christian people to take over education, to become the voices of influence. Next to that is medicine. We want for Christians to rise up, although we're only 8% of the population in Indonesia. The vision for our Christian schools is that we would graduate Christians who are passionate for God, who know God, who have a heart for evangelism, who have the knowledge of pastors, but yet they are doctors. And every day they're in the villages, and they're serving the people as doctors and as nurses and as scientists. They are developing and leading our nation in the world of medicine. Next is business. And in the vision of our school is to raise up entrepreneurs. And we tell our students, if you're going to be in a business, you better be good if you're going to graduate from this school. Because you're filled with the Spirit of the living God, the creator of the universe. You're going to start a business. I don't want to see you sitting behind a cash register on some little store on the side of the street. I want to see you raising up a business that changes the world. And you will impact the world of business, and you will show the world of business how to handle your finances in a way that brings honor and glory to your God. Next to business is the church, and we do have a vision to raise up leaders for the future of the church. Media. We teach creativity. We teach the arts in our schools because we want to raise up artists, communicators, writers, filmmakers who are impacting, who are influencing their nation. And they are doing this in the name of Christ for God's honor and for God's glory. The arts, technology, and government, we want to see these domains taken, led by leaders. And this is what we mean when we're talking about Christian education. I want to ask you to pray for us, and for those of you that are pastors and Sunday school teachers and representing the church, please consider us in the Christian schools as one of you. We are an expression of the local church. We are a ministry of the local church. We're dedicated to that. Embrace us, take us under your wing, and breathe life into us, empower us, and see us as partners in the work of ministry to raise up the next generation. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.